So this is the worst decisions ever made celebrating failure. You guys are really sick to want to see this, honestly. But so anyway, to start with, who am I? So I'm Neil Procter. I've worked for end users before. I've worked for small and large consultancies. I've been on the vendor side as well, and more recently I've kind of been an independent consultant leading kind of largish Salesforce projects for enterprise clients. The latest one being Hive. Does anyone have Hive, by the way? Yes, fantastic, great. Your sale was processed through Salesforce. At Hive, it's a relatively large project, a team of about 30 people, developers, BAs, testers, architects, all that kind of stuff. And I've been with Hive from startup to now, what is an attempt at global domination against Nest and other things. The things I'm going to talk about, I'm kind of trying to keep the projects anonymous as much as I can. But the first one is going to be about Hive, so I'll expose that one. So failure, first of all, that's the definition online. But really, for me, failure splits into two halves. There's the kind of intentional failure, fail fast, you know, all that good stuff. And then there's more unintentional failure, which tends to involve a degree of incompetence. But there's not going to be any blame in this presentation. It's all going to be very anonymous. And you know, obviously, the big thing from any kind of mistake or bad thing that goes on in a project is to learn from it. So that's the idea. So I'm going to split it in two. So we've got initially a few kind of isolated tech issues or failures that I've had on projects, and then the second half I'll just go on to more generic project failures. So the first one was to do with Hive. So the Hive active heating thermostat, I guess this is what you guys have got, the thermostat heating thing. Yeah? Oh, the old one, oh sorry, okay. So there was an old one which didn't look as pretty, and this is this was the new one that was released, and it was a massive thing because in 2015 this got released, and it was all about kind of Nest. You know, we're trying to compete against Nest in the UK, trying to get a thermostat that looked as nice. And in the context of Hive, a nice-looking thermostat is very important. But unfortunately, something went wrong on the first day of selling this new thermostat. TV campaign had gone out, adverts, radio, everything, and sales started pouring in, and we got this. Don't know if anyone's ever seen that. But this is so we during the sales process send certain emails out through Salesforce, one being order confirmation and maybe a couple of others. And on the first day of sales, I'm getting all these admin, you know, the emails that you get from Salesforce when something starts to go wrong. Got this, and everything stopped working. The e-commerce site, we couldn't take sales through the e-commerce site, through the call center, everything stopped working. I was desperately trying to get in touch with Salesforce to increase the limit, and my support guys in the call center were, just getting absolutely ravaged by the users who were queuing up at their desk. Just panicking, saying, what's going wrong? And the point here isn't about Salesforce having a limit. The point here is about handling these things. You're on a multi-tenant platform. There are limits. You know, you can't have a dependency on you can't have a selling dependency on your email limit or any other limit. So that was the mistake there. The other mistake there actually was kind of my fault, because we'd moved recently from an old org to a new org, and I forgot to ask Salesforce to bump up the limit for that new org, because you can kind of bump up that email limit quite significantly. But yeah, the key point is that don't couple the limits with your selling process, because I got hit over the head quite hard for that. Next one, or Process Builder, right? I don't want to be too sensitive, you know. I mean, I know a lot of you will use Process Builder, but this is in the very early days it first came out. I was really excited about Process Builder. I thought we could use it for a lot of use cases at Hive, but we quickly kind of ran into trouble with it in the initial couple of weeks around kind of bulkification issues, some bugs and stuff like that. So it was really unfortunate because you know, I got on Twitter and realized that a few people were having the same problems. And so we ended up having to make the decision to move away from it and kind of use the more traditional platform capabilities. I'm not saying don't use Process Builder, but I think when Salesforce released it, they weren't particularly clear with the caveats, and I had a big kind of rant at Salesforce at that point in time. So you've just got to be a little bit careful especially on kind of larger implementations where you're doing a lot of kind of bulk work, mass updating of records, mass triggering, that kind of thing. And my slight grumble here is we're moving from Salesforce to Lightning at the moment, but kind of, if you take Process Builder, it's a concept that's been around for quite a long time in CRM. If anyone's ever worked in Siebel, you might remember Siebel Workflow if you were around as long as I've been, like 20 years ago. So over time, you've kind of had this, I call it intermittent shower rather than lightning kind of thing, but it's a shifting of older CRM concepts from older technologies over to Salesforce. And so you've had a few external objects, you used to have virtual business components. This is kind of 20 years old. So I've got a little bit of a grumble with something like Process Builder not working as I would want it to work, as opposed to, say, IoT Cloud or some new funky thing. These are 20-year-old concepts, so I would take some of the blame in using Process Builder too early, but I think Salesforce needs to take a little bit of a hit as well. Hopefully no one from Salesforce here, but you can catch me afterwards about that if you want. Next one, high volume transactions on platform. So I had two problems with this. So one was an app exchange package. I'm not going to mention it, but it was attempting to basically provide an orchestration engine in Salesforce, almost like a middleware. And the second instance was replatforming a B2C website onto effectively Salesforce Sites. The app exchange package, well, once we ramped up with the volumes that we needed for the business, we had all kinds of different problems with it. It just kept falling over. Very, very awkward in the end, and caused a lot of business issues. And then, in terms of a B2C website hosted on Salesforce Sites, I was working with a client. The performance tester was doing performance tested, kind of representative performance tests against it, and just laughing at me basically because Salesforce doesn't scale in the way that kind of other web platforms do, such as AWS. You've got a lot of options on there. So we ended up moving both of those over to something that is a bit more suited to that use case. And again, this isn't a slight against Salesforce. This is about using the right tool for the right job. You've got to really think about where you're going with your volumes in the future. And then the other one is rolling your own cloud. This is a kind of, it's a slightly outside of Salesforce, this, but I've been on projects, a couple of instances where the enterprise client has tried to create their own private cloud using something like OpenStack and those kind of things, kind of open source cloud technologies, but it's on premise, and they're normally people who are quite attached to data centers and don't really want to let that kind of thing go. In both those instances, the company spent a lot of effort and a lot of money, and I would actually go back to Peter Coffey and what Salesforce say. I think they're quite right in this respect around not trying to kind of take on building a cloud yourself, or kind of, I think the starting point is to outsource that with someone if you can, either AWS or Salesforce. I've seen a lot of wasted money in that respect. And kind of the analogy that I've got is you wouldn't kind of build a nuclear power station in your back garden to provide the electricity for your own house. And I kind of tested that analogy because I know someone at Horizon Nuclear Energy. So I asked him how much it would cost to build a nuclear power station in my back garden. Any guesses? Actually, it doesn't matter because he just came back saying that. So not very helpful. So I pushed. I said, I get the planning permission and everything. And I get maybe like, I don't know, CO2 detector. I'm not a nuclear expert. I don't really know. And then he just came back with that. So didn't really prove it. But I think I'm right. I asked another friend who's a coal chef at EDF Energy. I don't know what a coal chef is. Put your way. So I asked him the same question. And he reckoned I'd be able to get a coal power station online for about 30 grand. So basically no one really knows what's going on. That's my conclusion there. Whether you talk about Salesforce, AWS or this. But anyway. So tech takeaways. Salesforce versus volume, be careful. Early adoption equals risk. That's going back to the Process Builder one. So I'll take the hit there about trying to adopt that very early. Every time Salesforce releases something new, I always want to jump on it and I always get burnt. Not just Salesforce, anything else. You just got to be aware of the risk and don't roll your own cloud. It really all comes under the banner of architecture, which is probably why Salesforce technical architects get paid so much, I guess. Project failures. So this is, that's kind of tech stuff, isolated tech stuff. This is a bit more generic project stuff, and actually relates to some of the other talks that I've seen and things that other people have talked about today. So actually, start with project one. So I came onto this project, year-long project. It was 2 months in, and I could see from day one it was in trouble. First thing, the scope was just, there was no kind of identified scope on the project. For this particular project, I was working for a large SI, and I had actually done the RFP response, which was 27 documents. So I kind of don't blame the team for not being completely clear on the scope. It was one of those crazy enterprise RFPs. Project managers fighting and all that kind of stuff. They didn't really understand what the project needed to achieve because they didn't understand the scope, didn't really understand the technology. It was a problem. And then there was a massive rift between the stakeholders and the delivery team. That was something that definitely needed to get fixed. They were working in the same town, but not kind of close to each other. They were in different offices. And this as well. Has anyone ever walked into a workshop that looks like this and expected to get anything done? Yeah, so I joined the project. I walked in there and, oh my goodness, how are we going to sort this out? I call this the MegaBrain, because you've got all these people round who are kind of between each other, meant to know everything, and seemingly no one person can kind of make a decision by themselves. So there were all those kind of problems, and I think it was heading towards failure. So how did we fix it? So first thing, scope was kind of the easy thing. I knew what was in the 27 documents. I could do an entire other presentation around how I worked with the exec of the client to sort out the scope, get the expectation back on track. Project managers had to go from both client and vendor side. So I was working for an SI then, so the SI project manager and the client project manager didn't get on with each other, were not really taking the project in the right direction. The bare minimum thing a project manager should be aware of is scope. And if they start going in the wrong direction, then you're fairly doomed. And we split up the MegaBrain. So we put a bit of the MegaBrain in the bin, because it was apparent in the workshops that they're just people checking emails. They're not, contributing, don't really have kind of add much value. And then kind of split the remainder of the client stakeholders into functional areas and had kind of smaller sessions with those people, more interactive, whiteboard, proper output from the workshops, that kind of thing. And we co-located the team and the stakeholders. So we moved the team into the same office as the stakeholders. So I was in charge of the delivery team on the SI side. And yeah, we just moved into the middle of where all the users were. So you can you just pull people over for demos, have those kind of informal chats, the water cooler moments, kind of build the relationship. And we ended up delivering the project. And everyone loved each other, kind of. So that was a nice happy ending. Not like this one. The 3-year plan. So the 3-year plan normally for a project is something like replace old stuff. So this one was kind of 3 different call centers, merge it into one. Year 2, make it more amazing, and then year 3, you really want to be, have something absolutely fantastic. That's the intention. So what actually happened? Well, phase 1 went live okay. This is in the first year, and that's fine. And I was kind of on the back of phase 1 when the phase 2 workshops kicked off. And this is where things started to go wrong. So I was getting phase 1 ready, and the phase 2 workshops kicked off, and I kind of rolled off phase 1 and was hit with this, which were the requirements for phase 2, which consisted of lots and lots of user stories, over 600, in fact, which is good output in terms of quantity. Many duplication, kind of created between a project manager and an architect. So they were a bit odd. I've got a couple of examples of kind of the title of the user story. So the first one, as a product owner, I want to a tailored sales. Well, I don't know how that was constructed, but it's like pidgin English. It's really weird. Next one, as a customer, I want to customer. I was reading through all the user stories and thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to deliver this? Really difficult. So the issues, from the workshops, there were 600 user stories, but no kind of overall view of the big picture. So for me, user stories, well, I use user stories, we're very agile at Hive, all that kind of thing. But normally, for a big project, it's a breakdown of a bigger process. So having some kind of overall business process is very useful. Sort out the sequence dependency, have everything on one page, and then user stories kind of a bit of a breakdown of that. I couldn't really see from the output what we were looking to achieve. It was a problem. Inexperience in running workshops, kind of led by the vendor and the PM at the time. I think running workshops is it's an art, kind of an art. I mean, not very many people do it well, and I think the output of workshops in the early days, if in terms of the kind of big enterprise projects, is very useful. You take the output, you phase it, you try and do the minimum bit first, and then phase on the other bits. But if the output is not clear and a bit of a mess, then you're in trouble. This was a problem. Business analyst who the business refused to speak to. So there was a bit of a relationship problem there, and I'm not sure how you manage to be a business analyst if you can't speak to the business. Well, it's pretty tricky actually, and relationships kind of fell by the wayside. And this was the last I heard about the lead BA on that project. The PM just got an email saying he'd moved to the Caribbean, and so he obviously knew we were in trouble. So there was a bit of people switching in and out. A new PM come in, PM goes out. That's a recurring theme from the previous one. Good new lead BA comes in. Now that was essential. And some good senior devs. The lead BA at the time, the lead architect and the lead dev departed. And so what happened to the workshop output? Well, it all got thrown in the bin. Over 600 user stories by the new lead BA. The new lead BA came on board, decided to obviously very quickly start from scratch with the senior stakeholders there. But we still had a go live of December, and we're just after halfway through the year. Oh my goodness. Delivery team, that is kind of me at the head of that. Exec up there, they think everything's okay, of course, because they've got this in the middle. Business stakeholders who've got it in their annual objectives to go live, to get the bonus, all that kind of stuff. Project manager who wants to kind of, push a good message up, but risk continually being fed up by the delivery team. So that was the situation, and the thing that I want to highlight here is this feeding up of risk. Risk is a funny one, and I've got a kind of analogy about risk. Now just bear with me here. Now I did this to my iPad, okay? Can anyone guess how I did that to my iPad? Yeah, you'd think that, wouldn't you? But no. Actually, when I did that to my iPad, I went in the repair shop, and I said to him, "Can you repair that?" And he just laughed at me. And the people in the queue behind me laughed at me as well. It's like, just walked out with my iPad, just like that. It was, yeah, embarrassing. But this is how it happened, and I'll show you. So this is a football pitch. You're looking through my iPad. This is a football. This is me. Look, with my little legs running. And, oh, there we are, just touched football. I look up, I see the iPad. Here we go. Oh, my goodness. You'd think a car ran over it, wouldn't you? But it was that. My goodness. The point about that is I controlled the ball. Why I was filming myself is another thing. I could talk to you about that afterwards. But I looked up, I saw the iPad. I kicked the ball in the direction of the iPad. I was aiming for the iPad, actually, but I didn't think I'd hit it. And this is the stakeholder attitude to risk quite often. You present up the risks, and you say, this will happen, but they're kind of, well, incredibly optimistic. Well, it just might not. Well, it probably will. Well, it just might not, though. crackers. Or actually, this is another thing. Actually, sorry. Sometimes it's a lack of caring in that I was working for a large SI and the delivery manager. This is a quote from the delivery manager at the time. So you've got a fixed date. It's not going to move. You're raising up all this risk. And this is what he said to me. Large SIs, eh? Fantastic. Be careful. That was back in 2006. They've probably all changed by now. It's all right. It's fine. So, what happened? Well, year one, we did replace the old stuff. Year two and year three, a huge amount of time doing that. And that's what you end up with. I mean, we did enhance year one to some extent, but it's really difficult because you've got, new features. So you want loads of new features over time. And what happened on this project is we went live with phase one, got a decent amount of new features. Phase two, so phase one was the one that went well. Phase two, champagne out, you get more new features. But then, because phase two goes live too early, it's not ready, the date wouldn't shift, you're raising up all this risk, then business change curve levels off. And the business have to understand this at the point where the risk is being raised up, that they can get the, or whoever's behind the date, you can hit a date and meet your objectives, get your bonus for year one, but are you really looking only that far, or are you looking 3 years, 5 years into the future? Because this is what happens if you go live too early with something that isn't ready. So, project takeaways. Stakeholder relationships. So that's from, that's across the board. When you talk about risk, if you've got a good relationship with the top stakeholders, senior stakeholders, they listen to you. In the first example that I gave, when we moved the team into the office, then the relationship got better and, it's just much easier at that point. Great analysis output is key. It doesn't matter whether it's one user story or whether it's, well, it matters more if it's 600 user stories, to be fair. But that thing about, it's the BA, BAs for me are absolute paramount, really good BAs who can create really clear, whatever it is, process maps, user stories, etc. Getting that right is the key for me. Delivery teams, developers, they tend to be really well organized. They've got really good frameworks for stuff. They're fantastic. But that kind of workshop stuff, that's for me where the focus needs to lie. And vanity dates versus TCO agility. You can hit a vanity date, and that's fine, but then it will cost you in the long run. It'll cost the business in terms of money, and they need to understand that. If they don't, then the objectives of the project just will not be met. So that's jolly, isn't it? Are there any questions?
So my question for you is, what's the suggested strategy on confronting optimism bias? Because I think we're all guilty of it, where you think, nothing's going to go wrong. This is the first, I'm now experienced enough that this project is going to go 100% according to plan. And then when it starts to creep slightly out of alignment, you're thinking, no, I can still pull this back.
You communicate that risk as soon as possible, as early as possible. If I take the example at Hive today, I make sure that I'm very well connected into the kind of PMO team who run cross projects and very well connected to the leadership. So I raise those risks to them very, very early and get their help. The thing is about the layers above a delivery team is their role is to help the delivery team. And by raising those risks early, if you see something that is wrong early, and that does come through experience, I think, where you're seeing that something's starting to go awry. If you raise that early, then they should help you out. They should do something to help you out. The problem that I see most of the time is over-optimism, thinking you can pull it back and then not pulling it back. And if you raise that too late, then it's just too late to do anything about it. So I think raising it early, even if you only think there's kind of 30%, have the discussion early. That's what I normally do. Anything else? I think I'm about out of time. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks.